Hey there, Around the Layout listeners. With advanced previews of upcoming episodes and monthly giveaways, now's the time to become an Operating Crew member. For just $3 a month, you'll get an exclusive membership sticker, your name listed on the Operating Crew roster, and automatic entry into our monthly giveaway drawings. Just as important, your financial support keeps all of our episodes from behind paywalls and free of those annoying car insurance commercials you hear on other podcasts. Joining the Operating Crew is quick and easy. Head to patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. And if you missed that, you'll find a link on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And thank you for being a listener. Enjoy the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. It's time once again to find out what's happening in model railroading, and joining me to do that, the editor of Model Railroad News, Tony Cook. Tony.
Hey, Ray. How you doing today? There's nothing happening in model railroading.
Nothing? Again?
No,
nothing?
It's quiet. Not a thing. There's nothing new. Yeah, no.
I think you're lying, because there's a huge stack on the counter that nobody will be able to see. There's a pile of books. There's a pile of locomotives. The light's on back there, and I'm sure you've been working on a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to call you out on that. I think you're fibbing to us, Tony.
All right. Yes, I was kidding you. Yes, there's a usual onslaught of new arrivals and new products. And I've got a great guest today, too, that I brought with me. You know, I always bring somebody in, or so we have somebody from a newer company.
I like newer companies. It's seemingly a growing industry, and it's always great to see new businesses out there. But I think it's an old familiar name, too, that you brought on here, too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Has been in the industry quite a while. People know him from a lot of different things. So, yeah.
You got the old part right.
Now, there he is. There he is. Well, from Class 1 Model Works, it's Stephen Priest. Stephen, great to see you.
Hey, thanks. Great to be seen and heard. How you guys doing today?
Very good. Other than allergies, how are allergies affecting you this spring?
Same thing, man. Killing me.
I know. I love sitting out on the front porch with the dog, and then I come in and I just start sneezing and think I must be allergic to the trains in my train room. But I think I'm getting it outside.
I must be getting older, because it never affected me before, but now it's pollen, and we're right in that pollen season, and it just drives me crazy. And then everything here in the studio is black, so it'll start to turn a light green as everything starts to blow through the window. Yeah, and it just becomes a disaster until I clean it all up.
The pollen is the reason I'm a model railroader, because when the spring came, everybody went out and played ball. I went down in the basement and built models to get away from the pollen, and that is an actual true story, because I had oral allergies, and so I discovered quickly that air conditioning was my best friend in the basement. So what do you do in a basement? Well, you can watch TV, you can model railroad. So we took off on the model railroad thing.
Wow, how about that? There you go. There's a nice side effect of allergies. Who I never thought of that before. Yes, but yeah.
If there is one, there it is.
There it is. And now Stephen, as I say, Stephen Priest is you and Mike Bursky. Give us a little info on this. Is Class 1 Model Works, which I know that some folks are familiar with. They've brought out a few things in the last year or so. They had the rough luck of basically announcing and getting started in the very beginning. I think it was 2020, right as COVID landed. So So anyway, but they are up and running and doing all sorts of exciting things now.
Yeah. So a real quick back interjection of stuff. So we've run a publishing company for years called Paired Railroad Publications, and we did a bunch of books. We've done 34 books, and we produced Railroad Model Craftsman for a while, and even Model Railroad News with you, Tony, for a while. And eventually we were doing books where we were using drawings that I had gotten from my tenure at the Santa Fe Railway when they dumped all their railroad drawings. And we were doing some books, and manufacturers started calling me and saying, hey, you've got these drawings in your books. Can we make this model? And we said, well, sure. Can we use the drawings? And we said, sure. And then they said the two magic words, how much? And I thought, I can start actually doing drawings. So I'm an architectural engineer by trade. That was what my actual real training was in. And so we started doing work for other manufacturers. We did work for Cotto, Ather, and Walthers. Basically, just about every manufacturer in the United States we've done design work for. Well, a little light bulb went off over my head one day, and I was like, we're going this far. We're designing. Why don't we just go ahead and just go all the way and manufacture and distribute? So that hit me in 2019, that idea. And by the time I was around to raising some capital and getting some people to work with me, COVID had hit. So I guess the good thing about COVID was that it freed up a lot of office space around Kansas City because everybody started working out of their home. So we were able to go out and look through tons and tons and tons of warehouse office space and actually find a great space that we didn't have to spend a penny on to remodel, that just fit our needs to a T. So we were able to move right in and then get up and running. And also the COVID thing, it shut us down, but we really needed a year or so to design and draw all of our products and research. So yeah, it hit us, but not really, because by the time it was kind of letting up a little bit, we had our first products out and we were going to town. So we were blessed in that.
And it's been, I think, really innovative, Ray. I don't know if you've got to see the well car prototype that they selected for their first HO freight car was really interesting. And then the containers that they brought out for it were really nice too. And has that been more than a year? I guess that has been now.
It's been 2 years now. Yeah. It's
2 years.
Yeah. And they've pretty much sold out on a lot of that. We have a few of one of the types of containers left, I believe, but they've done really well. We've been super blessed with that. And the container or the well car was a TWF-10, which was always a favorite of mine because it's just an interesting looking car because of the way it supports in the trucks. I'm not going to go into all that, but it's a super interesting car because it's a heavy duty car. It'll hold up to 35 to 40% more weight than other well cars because of its design. So they were the heavy lifters of the intermodal world. And I remember switching those in and out of Sunflower Lift to Santa Fe's yard in Kansas City at Argentine. And I always looked at those and said, that is such a cool car. If I ever start a model road company, that's the first car I'm going to do because they're so unique. And so it worked out well.
Yeah, that's not the first time we've heard model manufacturers say the first one that they chose was because they liked it and because they wanted it, and kind of that driving force behind the selection of the very first product.
Yeah. And I guess the neat thing is if you're immersed in the hobby, in other words, you kind of have your hand on the pulse of the hobby, you're talking to other modelers too. And so you get an idea of kind of, what will work and what won't. Me and Tony talk all the time about the Ingalls shipbuilding turret cab. We kind of laugh back and forth. And it's funny because, right up there was the Krauss Maffei engines too. Oh. And now they're out, which is interesting. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of interesting. And other companies have brought out locomotives that I personally thought would never be viable, such as the SDL-39. I mean, there were a limited amount of those made, and they have sold far more models of that locomotive than ever existed in the real world, which is an interesting thing to think about because the model manufacturers need to kind of rethink about what they think about things. Just because there were not very many of them doesn't mean that they won't sell a whole bunch. And you can see this with narrow gauge steam. I mean, look at the K26s and 26s. How many of those have been produced over the years? Far more than were ever made in the prototype, hands down. So
it is interesting to see how, and I feel like in a lot of ways, what used to be the brass market is the high-end plastic market now. The things that would have only been possible as a limited brass release are plastic. How does that kind of stuff work into, the things that you select or look at? Are you looking for both something with a wide appeal, the typical GEVO or an F unit, as well as an odd duck like that SDL-39? I mean, is that kind of a product mix thing that you go big and then go for some niche things?
Well, there's a lot of things that have changed. First of all, there's a lot of models that we can redo because the older models that are 20 or 25, 30 years old really aren't up to standard now. So there's a lot of things we can redo. So that plays into part of that. But the other thing that plays into it, obviously, is sales, getting people interested. It amazes me that ScaleTrains, it still amazes me that their first model was a turbine. And that was an enormous risk. Shane, man, I tell you what, I bet he had some sleepless nights because I sure would have. And to bring that out at the first model, but a lot of it was not the model itself. A lot of it was the hype that Shane generated around the model. And, I think some manufacturers really paid attention to that aura that was created around the model. He almost created a lust for that model in the industry. And that's what you've got to do. So you can bring out things that didn't have huge amounts in the prototype, but man, if you get people interested in it, and, Steve Jobs at Apple was really good at doing that. But if you ever watched any of the Apple keynote speeches, by the time he was done, you wanted to go out and buy every Apple product there was because It was just, he painted it just like this is the future. And if you're not part of this, you're not, I mean, it was amazing. And so a lot of it's marketing. I will go back and say this. It's interesting. There have been a lot of really, and this is going to be right up your alley, Tony. There, even in the 60s, in the early 70s, there were a lot of models that were brought out that I would have never thought would have sold. Like Trix had a U30CG out.
Yes, yeah.
I think it was AHM that brought out some of the Santa Fe 3-bay home-built, really weird iron ore cars.
Oh, yeah.
And I would have never thought that those would have ever sold. But, obviously they did, or maybe they didn't because they're not in business anymore. But so I'm not sure which way that goes. But there have been people that have looked at things and looked at unique shapes and unique colors for a long time. And a lot of what you do in the hobby is the decoration. And I'll give you a sample. We did the outside brace containers or the outside rib containers. And we did the colorful ones first, and then we went back and we did some of the less exciting ones, some of the just white ones with reporting marks, and those have not sold very well. So I think a lot of it, even though there were billions of them in the prototype, out running around, so I think a lot of it is curb appeal as well. I think people want to look at a flashy model and go, oh yeah, look, that's really colorful, that's really, that's really cool, and so. That kind of puts it in a nutshell. What, and there's a lot more than that to what goes into what we'll sell. Obviously, you want a lot of road names. You want the longest era possible for things to run. If you have a car or a locomotive out there, like our Jeep 40, we're doing a Jeep 40. I mean, those things were built in '65, and they're still running all over the place.
Oh yeah.
And so that gives us like 192 paint schemes. It gives us. I mean, it's just amazing. And there's 3 manufacturers that have announced those now. And I don't think any of us are worried because we'll just do different road names than the other manufacturers.
Yeah, more than enough market to go around on that. You talk about curb appeal. And boy, I think you probably saw, if it was my January, February cover story, I had an early look at their Thrall high cubes. Mm-hmm. And is there anything more, again, to sell an item to somebody? You could have 15 radius curves and need a stack of those high cubes because they're so cool. Right. It's like, I could never run them on my little railroad, but wow, they're awesome. Awesome pieces.
Yeah.
They're just such flashy cars and from such a great era from the 60s, and you still see those.
Yeah.
I shot a bunch of them. In fact, I think in that review, I shared some pictures that Shane Mason caught of somebody's, Thrall cars that were still going last year when we came back from the St. Louis RPM. So
if you
that's your newest model, isn't it? Your HO Thrall?
Yes, that's the newest model we have in stock. Mm-hmm. We have the ARI covered hoppers, the 5200s that we've announced, and I went ahead and built a bunch of them out. We're making a couple little changes to those. We didn't like how big the end grab irons were, so we're going to wire on those. There's a real challenge, and I'll just share this with you guys because it's a challenge. When you do wire grab irons on the end ladders on hopper cars, you lose the huck bolt detail, which is the little teardrop. Most people call them rivets, but they're actually huck bolts on either side of the railing. And so it's a real up in the air. It's a toss up in the air as of getting that huck bolt detail in or a scale size grab iron. So we went ahead and chucked the huck bolt detail and put the standard grab irons on because we had quite a few people that wrote in and say, man, we're really disappointed that you guys aren't using scale size wire on those. And it's like, I like the huck bolt detail, but I guess we'll go with the wire. So, and cost wise for the manufacturer, it really isn't that much, additional. They've got machines that'll bend, 100,000 of those little grab irons a day and, stick them in a hole and you're done. So,
wow.
So we made that change in this.
That car, the early shots you showed it, I was really impressed. The die-cast base on it, because it's a little different approach to that kind of center flow. I was impressed with getting that weight packed in. Is that going to be in the regular production models?
Yes, it is. And actually the TWF10s and those cars are coming from the same factory. And this particular factory owner really likes to use high quality Zamat casting. He's invested in equipment. And so the TWF10s, they were a complete Zamat car. No plastic. Well, just a couple plastic detail parts. The stirrups and a couple things were plastic. And then we asked him to see what he could do about creating low hung weight in the hopper car, and he did an excellent job with that underframe. And so it's really turned out well. We're happy with that car, and he's doing a wonderful job on them. Those are due out this fall. So changing the handrail style over is going to delay them about 3 weeks because they have to recut and some end tooling. But that's okay. It's worth doing, and we're happy about it. So
You mentioned having to make a sacrifice for those grab irons. As technology seems to continue to advance, how close are we to being able to have the best of both worlds? I mean, it just seems like all these small details, and you're another company that drives at those really small details. But and it's amazing the technology's there, getting there. But how close are we, Steve?
We joke about a lot of things in the office. We're working on operating HO scale pneumatic brakes. That's going to be the. We kid about that. Well, there's actually a lot of work to be done in a lot of places, but we're getting closer and closer and closer. Some of the things are just going to be impossible just because of the physical size of things. Yeah. When you drill that hole through that vertical end piece of L-stock that runs up the corner of a hopper car, you really have to have it drilled pretty much in the center because there's just no cross section to that piece. And when you drill it in the center, of course, that destroys that huck bolt detail, that quote unquote rivet detail on the end. And so there's no way to get the best of both worlds there just because of physical size. Now, maybe in the future we'll be able to get around that. But man, we looked at it. I just got back from China, and it's wonderful to sit down with the people that are doing the tooling and design work and really hash those things out, because a lot of the questions are, can we do this? Is this possible? How small can we make this? Can we go past 0.37 millimeter? Can we, all these things? And it's really cool to be part of that process, because you learn that eventually physically you bump up against the wall in certain things. And we're getting really close. And a lot of other companies like Tangent and Athearn and ScaleTrains, they've all pushed this bar forward, which is fantastic. And it's actually amazing to me that our business partners in China can produce these models for the cost they are, because there's a lot of assembly work. It amazes me. You walk in there and there's a room full of 100 people are all putting parts on a car. And I'm thinking, man, the amount of money that's going out the door there for manufacturing, it's an incredible thing. So I think we're getting close. I think there'll be improvements in materials and maybe improvements in, I don't know, maybe robots will be building these things like in the automotive industry in the future, and they would be able to do much finer work at a higher capacity. I mean, you guys probably know what pad printing is, where you pad print on the sides of cars. They now have automated pad printing equipment. So you can do the whole side of a car at a time instead of one color at a time. The machines have 6 or 8 workstations, and they will move the car down that workstation and just repeatedly add the color to it. And that is a whole new thing since last year when I was over there. So there is a lot of changes. And then UV printing, which is basically kind of inkjet printing right on the side of a car. A lot of the European locomotives have got very, very colorful. Well, and a lot of the United States locomotives, Amtrak, where they have colorful wraps, where you have gradients on the side where they go from black to yellow and you go through a gradient. There's a lot of that going on now. And so they have a lot of UV printing machines that literally just inkjet spray right on the side of the car. So instead of spraying on paper, the head moves down the car and prints the side of the car. So that may be another thing that happens. So the changes are exciting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you've done rolling stock so far. You mentioned briefly that Jeep 40 project. So locomotives are on the horizon as well.
Yes.
How is that project coming along? Because that always seems to be kind of one of the things that separates some of the companies. Like they'll do rolling stock, but they don't always make that transition to locomotives. So I always see locomotives as that heavy lifting of getting your catalog filled out. Yeah. So is that been a whole different thing to do compared to the containers? And
yeah, it has been. There's a couple of things, and I can't tell you everything because we got to have some exciting things to drop when we announce the engines. But we're having very custom decoders produced. So our decoders are going to be they're not going to be off the shelf decoders from manufacturers, and there's some reasons for doing that. Some functionality that we wanted that hasn't been available yet in the market. But as for the locomotives, they are definitely a much more difficult engineering process, because you've got, motors, you've got lighting, you've got sound, you've got automation, you've got, of course, a lot more weight. And then the body styles are generally more complex. So you have a lot more etching and a lot more detail parts. And, in this day and age where we've got, railroad, road name and era specific engines, you've got all this you've got all these different antennas and all these different PTC designs. And so a lot of it is, you could make a 1965 locomotive, which we're doing a couple. We're doing Rock Island, as they were delivered. So, all our SKU numbers are going to be the same. But when you start doing a couple modern UP or modern BNSF, every single one of those engines, every road number is different. The antenna's in a different place. And so that adds a whole another layer of complexity. And man, the Chinese, they were scratching their head going, Jiminy Christmas, you want to do this? And I'm like, yeah, this is where the market is. They said, you understand this is going to be more of a challenge. And I said, sure. And so we drew every single locomotive out separately, and so it's not like we do a UP Jeep 40 and there it was. We had to draw 6 of them because each of the 6 of them were different. But that's the way railroading is nowadays. And that's awesome to see.
It really is. It's that Brave, the Jeep 40 he's talking about. He had just announced that, and I think I was up in Atchison, Kansas, which is just north of where Steve and I are in the Kansas City area, and there was a freshly repainted like Jeep 40N sitting there. There's always a couple of road units. Yeah, there you go. Oh, look at that. Yeah.
Yeah, Steven's holding a picture of it up
that's
there.
The engine that's in our spec book for the UP Jeep 40. So
yeah, and I said, oh my goodness, I think your model is sitting here on the tracks right now. And I sent him a bunch of pictures, and then I think he went up with the drone and everything and got some really nice stuff. But there, again, something like that, a Survivor. That I think, Stephen, was a B&O or C&O. I think I remember I ran the serial number.
Yeah, they were B&O engines.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the drone. And so we fly over everything with the drone, and then we take close-up shots of everything. The drones have been a godsend because of the fact that you can get to places and view things that you could not do just a couple generations ago.
Right.
No, it's amazing. And the work that goes into that it's incredible. Because again, that Jeep 40 it's about as old as me. So it's pushing 60 years old.
Yeah.
And for that, with all the stuff done to it, I sat there that day because I always take the dog over there and we go to Dairy Queen or McDonald's or something for lunch and watch trains. And I sat looking at that 40, taking more pictures of how everything on it had something odd done to it.
Yeah. But it's wonderful from a modeling standpoint, and because people ask me all the time, we'll go back to what we were saying. Rapido is bringing that out and ScaleTrains has announced it. I'm like, guys, you got to understand, every time you bring out a different road name, it's a new market. Mm-hmm. Every road name you bring out is a new market because the Frisco guys, or the BN guys or whoever, they're waiting for their road name to come out. Mm-hmm. So anytime you release a new road name, it's a new market. So I'm not worried about it. I've never looked at the hobby as competitive. I've always looked at it as additive, especially manufacturing. It's an additive thing because if you think about it, when you build a model railroad, you're building a model of the world, not just locomotives, but the world. So we have companies that make buildings and grade crossing flashers and trees and flowers and, all that kind of stuff. And we're not competing with each other. We're adding on to each other to allow modelers to build a model railroad. And that's a huge way that we really need to kind of change our paradigm to think about it is, now you can look at it as competitive as Ray, if you go in the hobby shop and you got $500, the companies at that point are competing for your eye for that $500. But really down the road, if people are doing a good job of balancing their modeling, they're eventually going to get to the point where they're spending money on ballast and trees and wiring and, all the other things, because part of finishing a model railroad is buying the boring stuff as well as the exciting stuff.
Yeah, well, I think that $500, that whole concept, I think you've hit it right, which is you're not really competing. You're just hoping to align with my $500, that my interests are going to be what you're producing at the time and what you have on the shelf at the time. And my interests may vary. It could be a railroad that you haven't produced, but manufacturer X has, or vice versa. And like you said, it's just trying to find that right market. And that's got to be a challenge in itself. Where are people at? Where are their heads at? And what's really going to appeal to them must be a real challenge for you and your team.
We call that voodoo. We call that voodoo here in the office, because the voodoo is what sells and what doesn't sell, trying to predict that and then trying to understand why what sold did and why. But there's so many forces on it. The variables in that equation, I don't know if you guys ever had differential equations when you're in college, but this is a differential equation where you're solving for multiple unknowns because you really just don't know. It could be it could be as simple as, oh, that's a really colorful car, I'm going to buy that, to, oh, that's always been my favorite car, I'm going to buy that, or it's my favorite railroad, or it's my era, or just, or, oh, I just put a bulk automotive stamping plant on my railroad, so I need these. I mean, there's so many things that could go into that. My dad used to work for this railroad. I mean, I hear, and I love going to trade shows because of that, because you hear a lot of those stories. People come up, oh yeah, I bought a whole bunch of those because XYZ or whatever. And it's just interesting. And from a marketing standpoint, I mean, you can market, but a lot of it is just going to be, hey, we're going to bring something out and we're going to push it. And then we're going to educate people about it. And that's a huge thing. Anytime we do any of our podcasts or when we do any of our webinars, right after that, we get an enormous, huge spike in sales. So we did on the 86-foot boxcars, we did a great big webinar where we showed what was the different underframe types, the cushion underframe, and all that kind of stuff, and talked about the bodies and all the different body styles, the 7 different body styles and all that. And immediately after we did that podcast, boom, sales just went to the ceiling because people want that education. And that's why Tony does so good with what he's doing, because Tony is an educator in a lot of ways. What he's doing is he's taking text and visuals, putting them together and saying, hey guys, this is out there. And then everybody goes, yeah, and they run in circles and go grab their wallet and run to the hobby shops and buy. And that's literally what happens. You got to get people excited about the product.
And that's one of the things, the YouTube channel I've been working on lately, and the podcasts and things you talked about, Stephen. I've said that to a lot of manufacturers, and it's like there's not enough space to go into detail on what is, like the Tangent just doing the 60-foot Greenville boxcars. At one time, that would have been, like that original, that Robbins Rails that came out in like the 80s or 90s. It had about 9 parts, came in kit form, and there were a handful of road names. I've told you what you need to know. You can go get one if you need it.
Yep.
But I talked with David from Tangent for like half an hour about the different wheelbases, the different cushioning. He's doing them with different, the running boards on the top and without, and there's so much minutia to it. I've said before, boy, you guys are almost doing yourself a disservice because it's too much to explain to the average. They find out later, I had no idea that this road name was the only one that came with this or that. I wish. And like as a collector, that's a thing that hits me a lot of, I need that one because I didn't know they did this. It had odd fans, or it's the only one with these truck side frames. Because there was a time when, they were great models, but if it was an Athearn Blue Box or one of the old like classic Atlas Rocos, a Jeep 40 is a Jeep 40, regardless of what it was painted, and that's it. And now it's like, and that everyone's different.
And that market still exists. There are a lot of people that could care less what the details are like. They like it because it's pretty. I mean, I've had full-grown men come up to me and say, hey, man, I bought this because it's super colorful and it looks really neat, or I remember this as a kid. I think what's happened is that we have driven the railroad prototype modeler movement has pushed people that have that type of mindset, that engineering mindset, that research, historical, mechanical, machine-based mindset. It's really pushed them because they're like, oh man, these companies are really nailing it. But probably in truth, the majority of our sales are just to people that are like, that's a neat looking car. Oh, it looks well done. Here we go. A lot of people just plain don't care. And it's really interesting because when we announce locomotives, or freight cars, we get 2 types of letters. We get a type of letter A that says, hey man, I remember these as I was a kid. This is going to be really cool. I'm going to buy a whole bunch. And then I get another letter that says, hey, we need to make sure all the details on this is right. Or your handrail is going to be small enough, or you're going to, so you have these people that are living vicariously through what they remember. And you have a group of people that are now really concerned about the details. So it is a very interesting, unique group of people that are purchasing. And neither one of those is wrong. It's just different. And so you have to address kind of both of those. And really, if you address the group of people that are doing all the details specific and stuff, if you address that group, the other group's just going to come along. They're going to be fine. So the focus really kind of falls on those that are counting all of the rivets, that are looking, at paint and all kinds of stuff like that. And I'm gonna if I can, I'm gonna blab on about this for a minute because it's really important. One of the things that challenges all of us as model manufacturers or modelers, period, is paint and paint color. And there's 2 ways to address paint and paint color. The first one is that you go out and you try to find paint chips or samples of that kind of stuff. And since I worked for the railroad forever, I always carry a cold chisel with me or a wood chisel, and I've scraped paint off of cars for, 40 years because, we do this kind of thing. But as of late, I've come to the point where I realize that I think it's actually better to match into existing systems than it is to try to come up with new colors. So case in point, if I was bringing out a Southern Pacific locomotive, I would match into the existing environment of SP engines. What Athearn has done, what ScaleTrains, rather than to try to come up with a color. And the reason for that is you don't want to be the red herring in somebody's fleet, and just because you went out and matched the color and you try. So literally we match into existing color systems rather than to try to find the right color. Now, if the color is hideous and somewhere in there it's, but pretty much we try to match in existing color systems. And I'll give you an example of this. A while back, there was a large company that made a passenger train, and then it was a Great Northern train, and then the locomotives, the A and B F unit, were made by a different company. And when you put the locomotives with the train, the colors didn't match at all. And it was really, really hideous. And it was bad for both companies because the idea was to make the entire train, right, the Great Northern green and orange, and the passenger cars were green and orange. But when you bought the train and you bought the motive power, because it was done by two separate companies, they didn't fit together, and they should have matched into the same paint system. That would have been a huge thing. And paint and decoration is almost as big as a challenge as detail on freight cars and locomotives, because you can get in a real world of hurt with paint.
Oh, absolutely. I think as much as some of the folks scream about details, there's nothing worse than a model coming out and it gets branded as that's not that red, that's not the right orange, and it just suddenly is,
And photographs don't work. I mean, literally photographs, we just don't, Overland Models, when they gave my company their entire collection of everything. We have all the Overland Models research. Brian donated all that to us. He's been a good friend for years. And one of the things that they had, bless their hearts, what they had done for years, is they had gone and got paint chips for every project they ever worked on. So we have a very, very large library of actual prototype paint chips. But even then, if it were that or to match into an existing system, I will, especially if it's a major manufacturer that's produced, Santa Fe Red for a long time, or they've produced, whatever, I think it's best to match into an existing system, because those railroads already, are living on people's railroads. And when they take your locomotive home and they set it next to the other, they're going to want this to fit into a system. Now, the guy that's buying one engine, for his 11-year-old son, they're going to run it in circles. That's we're not going to worry about that, because they're going to be happy with whatever they get. But when you're matching into existing ecosystems, that's a huge, huge thing.
Yeah, sounds like the cost of being right? You don't want to be 100% right and then be the odd duck like you mentioned. Yeah, for sure. We're running out of time here, but I did want to ask you, we were talking at the top of the show, actually, before we came on air. You just returned from the Denver area and the Rocky Mountain Train Show. Why don't you just give us a recap of that? Because unfortunately, it seems like Tony and I missed it. So tell us a little bit about your experience there.
Well, it's a good show. That show actually draws the majority of major manufacturers. And when your major manufacturers show up for a show, then you get the what I would say the serious modelers as well. There's a large stroller crowd there because there's a lot of modular layouts and things. And those are awesome and neat as well. But when you start getting the manufacturers and the major retailers that show up, like Spring Creek and some of the others that show up, even Midwest Model Railroad here from town, they were there. They had a booth there and they were selling as well. So it was great. We had a great crowd on Saturday morning. Like I said, it died at about 12:30, but our sales were stellar Saturday morning and then Sunday as well. It was a good show. The venue's good. It's relatively easy to get to. The parking's right next to it. And had a good time. We had a really good time there. Talked with a lot of the manufacturers. Everybody in the industry, so you start hobnobbing with everybody, and they kid you a little bit, and you kid them a little bit, and so it's really kind of cool. And manufacturers are like anything else. There are manufacturers that will work together but there are manufacturers that are closed door that you'll never have any idea what they're producing or anything. So it's always interesting to see who chooses what side of that chessboard they're going to be on. So anyway, it was a good show. I enjoyed it. Saw a lot of great people. Saw a lot of old friends I haven't seen in a while.
Yeah, that show seemingly is becoming the place to go out west. We've got the place to go out east here near me with Amherst. And
Yep.
boy, Rocky Mountain Train Show is really taking off and becoming that destination train show as well. So,
Yeah.
Stephen, it was great catching up with you and learning more about Class 1 Model Works. And for the folks listening, definitely go and check out all these new releases, class1modelworks.com. And we'll provide a link in the show notes as well. So, Stephen, thank you again for joining us here on Around the Layout.
Thank you, guys. My pleasure. Always good to see you. Tony, it's good to see you. We got to go get a burger someplace together and sit down and talk about the industry at some point. So,
Absolutely.
all right, gentlemen, we will see you.
Well, Tony, I've seen Stephen at quite a few shows, but it's really great to hear from him here on the podcast and get to know a little bit more about Class 1 Model Works.
He is a very busy guy and very energetic and excited about the hobby as always. That is how he really is in real life. And as he said, we get to talk on trains, and neither one can get a word in, it seems, but it's always fun train stuff.
Yeah, for sure. He's really enthusiastic guy, and it's great to see manufacturers like that out in the hobby that are producing things to, again, keep you busy. And seems like there's a bunch more out there that are keeping you busy with new releases yet again.
We do. We have several new releases, and talking to them, Class 1 Model Works, that Thrall High Cube has arrived. It got delayed in the typical shipping thing. There's been a lot of logistics and transportation issues in the last handful of years. And that was, I think, January's Model Railroad News cover story. And then is just now, we're recording this in mid-April, is finally landing. And that was not their expectation originally, obviously. And getting it in the magazine for the first part of the year is about when they thought they'd have them. But they are in stock now. And there's several kinds of those HO scale Thrall 86-foot high cubes. So definitely check those out. I think one of the things that there's two models that I think got talked about like crazy in the last month since we visited. And the first would be, it was announced at the Rocky Mountain. Well, both these were announced at the Rocky Mountain Train Show in Denver. But ScaleTrains bringing back what was the MTH Tooling Norfolk and Western J-Class 484 steam locomotive, along with, again, what would have been MTH Tooling HO passenger cars. These will come back branded Fox Valley models from ScaleTrains. But had you got to see a look yet at some of there's been some advanced stuff. I think they took one to James Wright's model railroad, Drayton Blackgrove from ScaleTrains did, and they operated and showed it off a little bit. But always a favorite, that NWJ. Did you get a look at it?
Yeah, I'm looking at the pictures right now on scaletrains.com, and what a beauty.
And, this is early, as there's been a lot of, hey, is this going to be changed? Hey, is this correct? All that kind of thing. And again, they have been working on, again, this was, MTH Heritage Tooling that they are making some redesign to. Some of the biggest stuff is on the inside, as Drayton shared with me. One of the neat things they're doing, and I think it's pointed out in that one video, you can find it on James Wright's YouTube channel. They're putting speakers both in the tender, as is traditionally and typically done for a HO steam locomotive with ECC and sound, but there's room. They're putting one up in the boiler, that the shroud, the streamlined boiler housing on that 484, so sound will emit from both front as well as the tender, which will be a nice thing to see. There's three different models, I think, of those 600 series J's that are announced. But take a look, and again, grain of salt on that all of these pictures are early production, and there are still revisions being made on this. But that was, I thought, big news in the last week. And then the other one, I'll have a video out in the next week or so on my YouTube channel. I visited with Curtis Koch from Broadway Limited. Broadway Limited Imports announced that Union Pacific business car for HO scale, which I think he didn't, the last time we visited with Curtis here on your podcast, he had talked about, I think they were just teasing that and showing some early things. And now they have those, kind of fully decorated computer illustrations for that Kinefec business car. And wow, does it look nice.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. Look at the detail. I'm looking at the George Bush funeral train one. I mean, we both know when President Bush passed away in the funeral train, and boy, it seemed like everybody and their brother wanted to get a hold of that UP 4141. Well, now this really completes that train by having this at the tail with the seal of the President of the United States right on the back. deck, and just an absolutely gorgeous looking car. The detail is
Beautiful
just
car.
amazing.
Oh, yeah. This is all new tooling. It's going to have interior detail, interior lighting. Those red and green marker lights on the end will function, as well as those lights that illuminate the right-of-way at the bottom of the open observation. All of that will be controllable by a magnetic wand. I think the retail on it is only like $129. So your hobby dealer will probably have it for a bit more than $100 with a bit of discount to them. There's the kind of standard Kennefic version. There's the George Bush funeral train one that you talked about. There's the Spirit of Night. These are drumhead differences is the big thing here. The George Bush one has a presidential seal drumhead, and the drumheads will be illuminated. The Spirit of 1943 is another one, and then that Union Pacific, the 4014 sealed one as well, will be on its drumhead. But wow, these will be out in the spring of 2025, so about a year away. And I think Curtis mentions the deadline is mid-October of this year to get orders in. But I think these, for the price, what they are, the level of quality, are going to be really hot, that you're not going to want to miss adding one of these to a collection, or if you've got UP equipment. And we talked about some of the challenges in producing model trains, with our guest Stephen Priest, and he talked about railroad colors. And this is a great example. Broadway Limited is doing what Stephen had talked about doing, where it's like, you're looking for the right color, but you also don't want to alienate all the other models in the market that maybe have a color or a look. So you want to be in the crowd, not out of it, even if you think, you're going in a direction color-wise that might be different or accurate, whatever. And Broadway has mentioned, because so many people will be wanting to mix their Kennefic business car in with the Walthers proto passenger cars that have been produced for years and years for the UP business train. That is the armor yellow that they're focusing on, is trying to get it so it's a nice match and will complement, a set of Walthers cars. So interesting release. There's more UP business OCS type cars that they're considering, and business cars in general. So again, that's another reason, if you're interested, to place an order and get one of these cars. This is kind of a test for, well, how well do these sell? Is this something we could do more of? So definitely this is a release to support, and that's from Broadway Limited. You can find it by going to broadway-limited.com and looking under the passenger car rolling stock section there. But really, I think those two are some of the biggest things out of the Rocky Mountain Train Show that really, I thought, caught a lot of attention.
Yeah, great job by Broadway Limited and also ScaleTrains there. Some really nice pieces, and whether you're going to add them to you or you're going to collect them, because I can see both of them being a great collector's item.
Going to jump a couple of different scales here. When I say Microt Trains, you think N scale and then probably Z scale. Yep. And Microt Trains has dabbled in, I think Microt Trains had some HO N3 narrow gauge many years ago. They kind of followed some of the Colorado and Southern prototypes. And they've done some, I want to say there's been like either bulldozers or some load things that I've seen Microt Trains do in HO. But really exciting. Got this week. I've seen pictures of them, but I have one now actually to look at, and we'll have a review of it. Microt Trains is starting, and again, this is that changes in the hobby, the printing process, these weathered AccuRail, the little two-bay center flow hopper kit, you can now get, and it literally looks like a car that is faded, rusted. There's three different, there's like a Chicago Northwestern, a Burlington Northern, and I think Frisco is in the first group. So what you get is a standard AccuRail kit that you assemble, but the sides, the ends, everything has been printed with that covering of what looks like rust and fading, and it's just an amazing looking piece to take it out of the box. But that's their first release. And then I've seen, I haven't heard much on it, but it's on their website that the follow-up is a little 2-bay coal hopper. Again, this will be an AccuRail kit that they're doing printing on for HO scale from Microt Trains, and the follow-up car is showing on the website that they'll do a hopper car. So I'm eager to see how these go. It literally is a RPM level weathering job right out of the box.
Yeah.
And seeing it in kit form all apart, and yet it's all it's a really odd thing to see, but really cool. But those are awesome. Check those out. You can go to Microt Trains website, and under the HO tab, that's the only thing there now. That's their first HO piece, and it's again a weathered AccuRail car they're doing. The other scale I want to talk about, I was interested to see Atlas has a new O catalog that rolled out recently, and there's a live stream where they go through it. So check that out on Atlas's YouTube channel. But that wonderful 280 consolidation that it looks a lot like the same prototype, and I think it's just because it's a USRA. The model that was Bachmann's Spectrum 280, that was a big winner in the late 90s and is still a hugely popular model. They've done it in scale. It's just a wonderful little consolidation. That prototype looks to be a new Atlas O Premier steam locomotive release that's coming. And they're sharing some pictures. It's got a die-cast body, and there'll be several road names, but a really awesome scale O steam locomotive. I think it is coming in both 2 and 3 rail versions, but a nice piece. And again, I always thought that consolidation, it's big enough that it looks like a good hefty solid steam locomotive, but small enough that it works well on a model railroad.
Right.
So for O, I think it'll be a nice fit and is an interesting piece. And that's new from Atlas. And you can find out more by going to Atlas's website is atlasrr.com.
Isn't it awesome, this O scale? I mean, I'm an HO scale guy, but O is just so awesome to look at.
It is.
It's so appealing and appeasing, I guess, to the eye, the detail and everything else. I just love, when I walk through train shows, you get over to the O scale stuff, and even modern stuff in O is just wild to see it in that size.
It is fun. I mean, it's a very tempting. O and G both are things that I will pick things up just because, wow, that's so cool. I want to have this giant box car, or I want to have this really big caboose model. So yeah, it's fun stuff. So always check those out, even if you're an HO or an N-scale guy. They make great display pieces, or it's a fun thing to have. And if you're in those scales, those bigger scales, there's so much neat stuff coming out now that there's a reason to be doing those scales.
For sure.
Rapido shared the Alco FA1 FB1s are going to be arriving this spring or summer, they're saying, and they showed a Union Pacific one this past week, was shared on their Facebook page, and boy, it looks really, really nice. I got to digging up some information on those, and I found if you go back to Diesel Era's January, February 2005 edition, there's a nice feature on, in fact, it's on the cover, you'll see the Union Pacific FA1 FB1s, and I hadn't really thought about it, but with all the steam that UP bought late from the Challengers, the big boys, those 412-2s, UP doesn't really start buying mainline freight locomotives until after World War II, and that's 1946. They had some diesel switchers, and they had the M10,000, that City of Salina Streamliner. There were diesels, but as far as that move to dieselization, this article in Diesel Era mentions that's early January 46, there's a management change. And then they basically, from like Green River West, start changing that to being the diesel part of the system. And these Alco FAs were some of the things that did that. So that's a great feature to look up. And if you're looking for back issues on Diesel Era, before I became the managing editor, which was a couple years, 2021, I guess it doesn't seem like it, but I think it is. So anything before that, go to withersbooks.com. And you'll find back issues that are available on Diesel Era there. And I think that one should still be around because it's a 2005 edition. But this FA1 FB1 really looks nice. Rapido does such a great job. And this is such a classic cab unit. There's been so many FAs done over the years. I think the one they did maybe originally was an FA2, was the first model out. I think this FA1 is its first release. But sound and non-sound editions. But these pictures are out on this Union Pacific one, so go to Rapido's Facebook page and get a look. I saw a couple people saying, wow, I am now suddenly such a fan of Armored Yellow. And it's like, yeah, it is very cool, yeah. One other Rapido thing that we talked about in at least maybe a couple shows back now, they announced that Bud RDC project for N-Scale, which a lot of people were excited about, but the entire project was a conditional release. So it was dependent upon, the reservations and pre-orders for the first announcement if it would be a go. And I did see that in the last week or so, that the green light has been given for the in-scale Bud RDCs. So I'm sure a lot of the 1160 crowd is going to be excited that Rapido will have an RDC model out of real high quality. So everything that was announced in that first group is a go now, and no doubt there will be more on the way.
Awesome.
Are you a bowler? Do you bowl?
I used to, until my knee couldn't take it anymore, and
Wow.
I think I bowled on a drinking team more than I.
Well, it's been years. I do remember I went bowling with friends when the Power and Light District first opened in Kansas City, north of Union Station. Oh, it'd been like 20 years ago. And I didn't know it, but they have these little things that come up, for the gutter, so you can't throw a gutter ball, like a little protector or something. And somehow, I don't know, I wasn't paying attention and didn't realize. And I don't know how many, I thought, well, I'm really doing good. I've not thrown a single gutter ball. And finally someone pointed out that they put a cheater thing up for me. But
just
whatever.
as Tony was about to sign up for the
Once I
BBA
was-
tour,
yeah,
and he's like, I could go bowl
know.
against these guys. Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking, man, Fred Flintstone's got nothing on me. I think bowling may be my sport. So anyway, but yeah, so no, I have not picked up a bowling ball in a while, but maybe I should try it again, especially now I know I can put the little cheater thing up. But anyhow, Walthers, in their wonderful Cornerstone series, a vintage bowling alley kit. And it has just that classic mid-century, it's got a sign for the bowling alley, and it's that classic, like I call it 1950s. It may be a little bit older than that architecture, but there's a new kit coming out from Walthers on a vintage bowling alley, which, I mean, for all the automobiles that are available in HO, it's just a wonderful thing to have that sitting there and have a bunch of neat cars parked around it. But that's coming out. And then Walthers announced 2 new freight cars. They're doing an all-new tooled ice hatch reefer for the mainline series. And then their single dome tank car is coming back with the revised. It's going to have the wider dome area for like the loading into the tank and the unloading. Mm-hmm. So that is for non-pressurized commodities that would have been in it, I believe, is the reason for kind of the wider mouth version of the tank. But those are 2 brand new cars. I've already been asked a couple of times, what is the prototype on the ice hatch reefer? I did ask my contact at Walthers, because looking at the decorations, it's a mix, it's a mainline model, so it's not shooting to be dead on for, one prototype only. They've done a couple PFEs. There's like a Burlington, there's a Western, Refrigerator Express. So again, not all these would have operated the same kind of car. So what is the car? I looked thinking it might be a PFE prototype, and checking the 2 PFE lettering schemes they're doing, each had different like R40-10, different codes as to what they would be. My person at Walthers said they believe it's based on a PFE, but we're waiting for some additional information. So I'll try to get that posted on Facebook, or again, as I dig through that PFE book and try to find it. But that's a new car that's coming out, as is that single dome wide mouth tank car. And then the Great Dome is coming back. And again, talking of the new kind of enhanced printing and abilities that they can do in the hobby, that neat fall foliage car. This was the Great Northern Great Domes that worked for Amtrak. Walthers has like 3 regular paint schemes, a Phase 3, Phase 4, Phase 6. And I think the cars, like Ocean View is one of the names on them. And again, all these are Great Northern Heritage cars that ended up on Amtrak service. But the one really interesting, eye-popping one is that wrap for fall foliage trains that was operated about 10 years ago. If you go to Walthers' website, you'll see Matt Donnelly, who I know and works with Amtrak and works with the hobby companies on models, shared a prototype picture with Walthers that they show of the car. But this will be fully assembled. You can get it with all the pad printing done, so it would have like Ocean View and the car number, all of that. Or you can get it as Walthers has done with some of their proto passenger cars, where it has a sheet of decals that you complete that part of the car for the various Amtrak liveries they're doing. And then again, did I mention that it's lighted and non-lighted? So there's technically, I guess, 4 different ways to get it: lighted, non-lighted, decals, no decals, and printed. So you can look at it and see and pick which way you'd like. But a neat run of those Great Dome cars is coming from Walthers, and I'm eager to see those. Have we talked to, can't remember now. Have we had Matt Herman on with 3D Central, or have you talked to him? Do you know Matt?
I got to meet Matt at Neil Schofield's layout right around Amherst.
Yeah, his 3D Central is just going gangbusters. I keep seeing samples of things. In fact, I even called him and said, there's no way that's 3D printed. What are you doing to that in Photoshop to make it look that good? And he says, no, it is. I think I'm gonna dive in. I consider that Evan's side slider, and I saw my friends Luke Lemons and I think Mike. Was it Andy or Mike? No, I think it was Mike from Second Section built and decaled one, and I was impressed with both of those. But thought, oh, I don't know, the decaling over all the different. It looked like a rough one for me to decal anyway. But I see there's a new, Matt Herman with 3D Central works with other smaller companies. So when you go to the 3D Central website, you'll see like, Plate C models. You'll see names, like Tangent and Moloko that he sells and has some of those things too. Bridgeline Design is the company he's working with on some Pennsylvania prototype RBLs, a little 40-foot plug door boxcar looking car. They worked for Pennsy. They went on to Penn Central and Conrail. It's their X54, and it's a neat little car. I've always liked those little 40-foot. I always just called it a 40-foot plug door boxcar, but it's really not a boxcar. It is the bunkerless refrigerator car. And I'm thinking I'm gonna try one of these and see how good this is. But boy, some of the stuff Matt's doing, I'm beyond impressed. I don't know if you caught it on his Facebook page. He showed he printed something, a boxcar, and printed the running board as part of the car.
Wow.
That way you don't get any, warpage or coming away from the roof line. And I mean to tell you, I thought it was just amazing looking. But anyhow, 3D Central Trains is the website. 3 is in the number 3, 3dcentraltrains.com. And then you can find that whole group of things and do some looking around there. And impressive stuff. And then finally, we talk about, like 3D Central, the Jeff Paint and Decal. Stephen Wilder with Smokebox Graphics sent me a link and information on several new boxcar sets. Smokeboxgraphic.com. He does wonderful water slide decals, and he's got several new HO boxcar. They're like patch reporting marks and other things to kind of customize and get a real authentic look for some of your rolling stock. And again, I highly recommend check out Mr. Wilder's Smokebox Graphics and see some really interesting stuff. He's got decal sets that he sells, I believe, direct there from his website. And remember, too, he just did an HO scale 70-ton hopper for Broadway Limited, and he's going to have a Jeep 35 exclusive road name. So find out what that is by going to smokeboxgraphics.com.
It's been a while since I've been on Smokebox's website. I've always ordered the reflective stripes. Those are always fun to install and update locomotives and boxcars or, any rolling stock. But boy, look at the stuff he's got on here. This is really amazing. So definitely check it out. If you're looking to patch cars or, letter them your own letters or add detail, any of that graphic detail and specific stuff like MWCX is one I see all the time on patched cars. He's got it all right here. INTX, BKTY, all these, he's covering it. So this is absolutely fantastic. So go over there and check it out.
But that's it. That's awesome stuff. There's a little bit of everything. I think I got everything but something in Z or S. So
yeah, that's quite a bit. I've got 2 things I want to mention, things that I'm going to be participating in. We'll start with our friends at ScaleTrains who are hitting the road again. And there was a big section of the map last year that was completely uncovered on the ScaleTrains Road Trip. And that's the Northeast where I'm at. And they're coming to town. So it'll be good to see Shane Wilson and crew up here in the Northeast. Again, I mean, we see them up here for Amherst, but back while it's a little bit warmer will be good. The ones that I'll point out, there's a couple stops near me. Friday, April 19th, they're going to be at the Torrington Area Model Railroaders. That's a great club, one to check out there. Those guys do a great job. It's a modular club, but they set their layout up in that building. Nice space that they have there, but they also take it on the road as well. But it's a good place to go check out that. The next day, Saturday, April 20th, they're going to be at the Amherst Railway Society. We know those folks. That's at their location in Palmer, Mass. So you can get a couple things done. You can go see the folks at Scale Trains, check out the layout at Amherst Railway Society, and then head to the Diamond in Palmer and check out the town of 5 railroads and get to see all the CSX and NECR and Mass Central and all the other action that happens within Palmer. And then if you're anywhere between, say, Maine and Michigan, you should go to their website, scaletrains.com/road trip, and you can check out all that. And also Rhode Island, also on Monday, April 22nd. So there's all within that area. Make sure we plug that all in. And then this Wednesday, I'll be appearing on TSG Live Talking Trains with our friend John Abaticola. I'll be on there talking about some of my photography, talking about the podcast, talking about model railroading, and then whatever other topics come up. Hope that you'll take some time, join us live. That's Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. And looking forward to being on a podcast that I don't have to edit afterwards. So that'll be a lot of fun. So yeah, John's a great guy. He's a great friend of the podcast. And I'm certainly looking forward to talking about all those things and the rail fanning that I've been doing and, all the things that are talking railroads. And I'm sure everybody that joins there will be able to throw up some comments, and it'll be great to interact with folks as well on there.
Fun, busy stuff. What springtime are you getting out doing any rail fanning yourself?
Well, I just got back from Texas. I went down there to see the grandparents. I was down there last week. I got to get some BNSF action in, and then I saw for the first time in person the Fort Worth and Western, which is a really cool railroad. And I just put up a picture, and I called it As Close as I Got, because that's about as close as I got to him. Was a long lens, but there's certainly a lot of interest. All their locomotives have a name to them, and it's just nice to get off the beaten path. I mean, it's great to see Class 1 railroads down there, BNSF, KCS, and UP, and they just cover the gamut down there. But it's great to see those short lines too, and be able to do some rail fanning on them, and see some switching and see some yard work as well.
That's a neat railroad. I've hit it a couple of times coming and going between Missouri and Texas. And yeah, I love they've got like SD45s, they've got a great mix of like classic second generation power, and everything's nicely painted in that yellow with blue and then the big red FWWR. It's a sharp looking railroad.
Sure is. And I think I marked out a couple spots, and I've made a couple connections that are going to help me get in better spots the next go around. Maybe this fall I'll be down there and get another look at them and do some rail fanning again. But in the meantime, yeah, I've got the CSX River line I've been out to, and we'll be heading to Syracuse for the Central New York NMRA's Ops Till You Drop at the end of the month. So that's a great time to just ride along on Route 5 and catch some rail fanning between Buffalo and Albany. And there's just a lot of the stuff. So I always try to figure out a way to get a trip incorporating rail fanning. It's not a trip unless you be able to do a little rail fanning with it.
Exactly. Any place I got to go for something, it's like, okay, what's around there and what would be a good time to go? That way I might catch something. Yeah, that's very awesome. Well, did you have anybody ask me any questions in the last month? Do we have a question?
Yeah. What a segue, because now it's time to ask Tony. This is where you, the listener, get to ask your model railroad questions to the editor of Model Railroad News, and that's you, Tony Cook. Our question comes to us from Jerry Jackson.
Hi, Tony, and thank you for taking my call. My name is Jerry Jackson, and I'm calling from Conroe, Texas. And my question is, are the manufacturers going to produce cars from the 40s and 50s? I model the transition era. And you said on the last podcast that the manufacturers kind of go in cycles. I'm hoping that they're going to cycle back around to that era. Seems like everything is modern now. So thank you for considering my question, and I hope to hear it on the podcast. Thank you.
That's a good question. That is a good question. And Conroe, I know Conroe. That's just north of Houston. I go through there quite a bit coming and going. It's funny to be asking for transition era, because there, again, as I say, things kind of go in cycles. Going back probably about 30 years ago now, more or less, as like the lifelike Proto 2000 freight cars started rolling out, like that 53-foot flat car, that 50-foot like automobile box car, beautiful models. They did a lot of great things. But one of the questions at the time was, Well, they're great, but everything is transition era. Like I think they did a 4427 covered hopper. They did a couple things that kind of moved into the 1960s, but as wonderful as these models were, yeah, everything was pretty much locked in that steam to diesel era, which I know kind of frustrated you to hear that. Boy, they're great models. I wish they do something without running boards. So yeah, we do go in a lot of cycles, it seems, in the hobby. I do see that modern has been a real hot topic lately, both in motive power and rolling stock, that we see a lot of contemporary. When I say modern, the last, it can be back to the 90s, but, kind of 2000s and forward stuff is being done. I think there still is an awful lot of good transition era stuff and stuff right after that still comes out. So it remains a popular thing. And motive power wise, there still is so much being done for that era. Those Alco FAs that I just mentioned from Rapido Trains and HO are ideal cars to have, lined up with ice hatch reefers or 40-foot box cars. So I think they're definitely, that market has never gone away, but yeah, it's not had quite the interest or the push that it had, maybe quarter century ago, but everything just kind of comes around. So, there always is a little bit of everything in the hobby, but yeah, transition has not been as huge as it was a few years back.
It's kind of like a time, I'm thinking like in my mind, I'm seeing this, horizontal line, and this block that kind of slides, right? It's like, as, we leave the late 1800s, early 1900s, farther and farther away. So does that block, but within that block, there's a loop within the block. It's like, we get, the 50s are still relatable to folks that are modeling, but as we get later 2010s, unless you're really deep into history, there's unfortunately not many with us anymore that can relate to that directly. So I'm sure there's a fadeaway at some point, but the block seems to be pretty long. We've got people of a multitude of different ages and then a multitude of different interests too.
Oh, for sure. And, like Bachman just did some of those early 440 Americans, and that's had a lot of attention. And that's an ancient prototype, to do. So again, yeah, there's a market for anything on rails.
Right.
But yeah, I do see there are things that kind of come around. I mean, it wasn't that many years ago that if you said Conrail or Amtrak, no takers, no, doesn't sell. And in fact, that always frustrated me many years back. Why don't we have better, like, F40PH models for motive power? Why aren't there more superliners and Amfleet cars and things like that? And the response I always heard was, oh yeah, Amtrak doesn't sell. And yet now, not the case at all. That, Amtrak, Conrail, those are hot properties. So again, I think a lot of things, it's like, a fine wine. It has to age a little bit sometimes for it to suddenly be something that, well, yeah, now suddenly a string of BNSD40-2s does seem kind of interesting and unique. Whereas at one time it's like, oh yeah, no.
Yeah, I would imagine like if you modeled a car that came out, a freight car that came out 2 weeks ago, it's like, it's a matter of settling in the relatability. It's like, I've never seen that before, but then it's like, oh man, I've seen like, 30 of these in the last couple months. Now I'm starting to relate to it. Yeah. You got to build in the relatability.
And I think there's always that in the hobby. You always hear the story of like the stuff that the first stuff you get exposed to, whether it's in model train form or the first time you start going out rail fanning as a kid, that those things tend to imprint or lock for you. That, okay, railroading to me is, 1970s Illinois Central Gulf, this or that, because I was a little kid and that was the stuff I first saw, rail fanning. But then to somebody else, it might be, 1990s Pan Am or, whenever that railroad was around. And that to me is like, oh, wow, yeah, it doesn't mean anything to me. So, yeah, it depends.
That's why it's so fun to dig into the origin story here on the podcast, to hear people say that, because that's really, how it relates to what they're modeling now. And sometimes you find they just completely threw that away and moved on. But a lot of times those are the seeds that are planted that explains a lot about how they model what they're doing now. So, yeah, definitely really neat. So that was a great question. So thank you, Jerry. Yeah,
thank you.
To have your question answered on an upcoming episode of What's Happening in Model Railroading, go to aroundthelayout.com/ask-Tony. Follow the instructions there to leave your voice message. We'll select up to 2 questions each month, and yours just might be the one heard and answered here on the show. Well, Tony, tell us, where can we see all the things that you're up to?
Many different places, actually. I'm on YouTube, Model Train Resource. I have a website, modeltrainresource.com, that you can go to as well for news stuff, as well as links to those YouTube videos. I do unboxing of new products. I talk to manufacturers about new products to give some insights and information that you may not know about on new things. Obviously, Model Railroad News from White River Productions, that I produce that for them. Diesel Era, just finishing up the second quarter, yes, with the follow-up on the Alco Century 415s. We're going to look at the Southern Pacific and Rock Island roster in this next coming Diesel Era that will be out in May. And I'm starting to work on the HO Collector Annual that will be out mid-year as well. All that from White River. You can find those things out by going to shop.whiteriverproductions.com.
Awesome stuff. We've got a lot of things going on, Tony. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to stop by and tell us what's happening in model railroading.
Thanks a lot, Ray, and we will check back in with you in May. I'm sure we're going to have more surprises and more exciting stuff.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. Past episodes and more can be found on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.